This project started in the usual way. A random stranger emailed me and offered to sell me a Jeep for $2.
He was firm on the price, but the price was reasonable. My only question was, how many spare tires do I need to bring?
So I took the shop truck and went and fetched it. And then in the first video, I got it running. In the second video, I got it out on the road. But there were some issues.
Definitely a few banging sounds.
Now it's time for some upgrades.
I had never intended to leave this fuel tank full of varnishy gas. But when I took it for a test drive, I couldn't add fuel to it. Oops, got an issue. So now I gotta figure out why. Luckily, this interior panel is completely fallen apart, so this is pretty easy to get to. I'm not finding any obstructions in the top part, which means we need to do a little more research. Now I'm gonna put fuel straight in the tube so we can actually see what's going on. Looks like we have a problem with the fill neck somewhere underneath. But I'm not going to worry about that right now because I'm able to fill it. And then I'll just completely ignore this problem until next time I need to fill up. I heard an awful lot of noise coming from the transmission, so I know there's issues in that area. Notice the grinding goes away when I put it in third. The hubs are disengaged, and I thought I had it in two-wheel drive. Now I'm looking at it. This shifter's a little on the vague side. I don't actually know what gear I'm in. There's no way this carpet's staying anyway. So let's get a look at what we got. Oh hey, I could just rip this whole thing out. Why don't I do that? Found a fishing lure. Most of one. Looks like we just removed this old piece of inner tube. Now we can see the linkage to this nice big hole in the floor. I can also see one of the reasons for the wobbly linkage. That bolt's loose. That holds the transmission to the bell housing. I think it'll work better if the transmission and bell housing are actually attached firmly together. New problem. I can't actually tighten down that bolt. As soon as I make a little progress, I go to shift the lever, it just pulls right out. The threads are stripped in the bell housing. Good thing the transmission's coming out soon. I want to see what's in this transfer case. I can't actually get my square drive to fit that. Lots of dirt and mud coming out of this. This transfer case has been jammed into the ground a few times. What's in my transfer case? Well, I've seen worse. It's looking a little sludgy and maybe a few chunks coming out. Almost looks like there's some metal flakes in it now too. There may be some issues with this transfer case. Now I'm going to drain the transmission, see what we got there. Looks like there's a little bit of water in the oil. Got some definite discoloration there. Definitely some metal in there. As I was draining the transmission oil, I was looking around. I noticed there's a bolt missing. That's one of 4 bolts that holds the engine and transmission together. There's another one up here which appears to have a stack of gasket material making a shim. This transmission only had 2 out of the 4 bolts holding it in. That's not a good sign. I'm gonna go ahead and undo the last 2. That's an impressive level of blue goo sticking out the side. This transmission cross member is supposed to have 16 bolts that hold it in. I think there's only actually 9 here. So that makes it a lot easier. I like the way this guy just omitted bolts. It's faster to do it this way. These transmission mount bolts are finger tight. I'm really glad I'm taking this apart. It's always a good idea to hammer towards your face. Crossmember. Last time I removed a T90, I made the mistake of leaving it complete. Probably should have done this before I took everything else apart. Probably been easier to have done all this first. And I regretted it, had to take it apart once it was already loose. So I'm going to repeat the same exact thing here. This is a Wagoneer. which is a bigger hole in the floor. I hope that makes all the difference. I was able to take the unit out complete, top cover, transfer case, even the front drive shaft still attached. Now, let's take a look at what we got. And that doesn't look good. There's no oil seal on this end, and it's not a sealed bearing. I'm gonna go ahead and take this top cover off. Save that gasket. No, we're not saving that gasket. It ripped already. That looks awfully wobbly. Now that's third gear, which will be a direct drive. And that's where I didn't have any noise. You can see that runs pretty straight because that collar locks this input shaft into this shaft, and that keeps it from wobbling around. Now I'll go and put it in second gear. Now everything moves around in second gear. Let's put it in first gear. You can see the whole shaft moving around there too. There's a stack of bearings inside here. I got this input shaft out. This input shaft has a bunch of roller bearings inside of it, and they ride on that shaft. Notice something unusual about that shaft, like the way the metal is sort of folded over itself. That shaft has been mauled and pressed over. And take a look at the flat spot on this roller bearing. Bearings aren't supposed to have a flat spot. Flat spots are kind of a hindrance to rolling.
These bearings were the worst I'd ever seen. Flat spots, barrel shapes, hourglass shapes, pitting. It was bad.
So this is the noise we heard. So those bearings are completely shot, and that shaft is completely shot. By the fact the metal's mushroomed over, I know that's going to be undersized. While I was fiddling with this transmission, I noticed something. The mounting holes, they go pretty much straight across on the top and pretty much straight across on the bottom. Then I looked at my bell housing. The two top bolts, pretty much straight across. This is the bottom bolt. That bolt hole for the transmission is supposed to be here, and it isn't. Which means that's the wrong bell housing. And it's cracked. So someone just drilled a hole here and shoved a bolt in it. That is the completely wrong bell housing. Even when I get this transmission fixed, it's not going to bolt into that bell housing because there aren't enough holes in the bell housing. I also heard a loud clunking sound that didn't sound like the transmission. My first instinct was the sound's coming from the front axle. Now that nothing's attached to it, hubs are unlocked, we're going to spin that and see if we hear anything weird. A little bit grumbly. That's jammed up. That won't turn. Now it turns. Now backwards. All right. Rumbles when it spins. Some backlash. A lot of backlash. I think we're missing teeth in the ring gear. There's definitely something wrong in here. We're going to figure out what it is. The teeth look kind of pointed. We got chunks off that tooth. Corners off this one. Oh yeah. Those teeth are pretty much gone. That pinion looks pretty beat up too. That would be my clunk. Knowing what the problem is half the battle to fixing the problem. But now I gotta decide how I want to fix this thing. There are some major parts that have serious issues. I have used versions of most of these parts, and I can go through and spend a lot of time and effort to make it the way it was. Or I could think about making it better, because I got a plan for this thing. My plan is to turn it into a dinghy and tow it behind the 53 Kenworth. That way, when we get somewhere, we can park this and use this to run around and do some exploring. And I want to be able to drive on whatever road I want, including those interstates in Texas with the 80-mile-an-hour speed limit. I think an overdrive and better brakes are probably a good idea. So let's see what we can do about that.
My first thought is upgrading to a 5-speed from behind a 4-liter, but they're pretty pricey around here. And then I found out it might not even fit.
Now I already installed a Wrangler radiator in this because it's a very similar architecture to the 4-liter Wranglers. What if I put the rest of the Wrangler in here too?
I started browsing the salvage auctions and came across this 94 Wrangler. It looked surprisingly good for a salvage auction, and it checked all the boxes. Clean title, under 100,000 miles, not wrecked, a 4-liter with a manual transmission. So I bought it for $750. Paid $80 to have it delivered to my parents' house, and it was going to be our ride home. Got on a plane. Wait, it was faster than that. Yes, there was a bit of turbulence. That was more like it.
When I bought this Jeep, I had it delivered, and it's a little hard to deliver things around here with all the trails. So I had it dropped off right there. You can kind of see pavement. There's a little opening. That's where they left the Jeep with the tow truck. Now I wasn't here, my brother-in-law was. He had to move the Jeep from down there up here. I told him it said it ran and drive. It didn't start. There's an issue with the alternator. It doesn't turn. And he also said the power steering leaks, but so far that's the only information I have about it. And there we got it. Let's see what we bought. Huh. Plastic wrap. That's pretty thick Connor armor. And a nice layer of mold on it. Oh yeah, that's all a wrap. Might be peeling that off. There we go. A little bit of mold on the top, that's okay. Spare bolts falling down already. Nice. It does have a 5-speed, that's the big thing. Awful lot of bolts lying around in this, and a manual in the back. This could be interesting. The seat's not bad, one little tear, but I mean, for a driver's seat, that's not bad. Yep, under 100,000 miles. Used batteries stacked in here. I think this is when my brother-in-law tried to start it. Windshield channel. Remote control for something? Does this have some kind of radio in it? Yeah, I wonder if it even works. See, it's in the glove box here. Original owner's manual. That's from the salespeople. All the original literature from when it was new. Tips from the Jeep product group. Probably how to buy accessories. Doors don't really work well. Huh. That doesn't actually stay closed. That might be an issue for driving down the road, but we're going to ignore it for now. It does have a back seat and more piles of parts back there. Doesn't exactly open. Oh, the tire's hitting the bumper. That's handy. What happens if I lift up the tire? Oh, there we go. We got something. Huh, we got stuff. We have a rear view mirror. I hadn't noticed before, apparently that's missing. But not anymore, we have it. Ooh, free tin snips. Nice. Another good sign here. We got an easy out. What have I got myself into? What do we have here? Hinge repair sets. More mirrors. Does this have side mirrors? It does have one side mirror. Got an extra one there. Maybe that's the one for this side. Steering wheel cover. Obviously sunglasses are important. Some kind of welting. New screws. Ella's weather stripping makes it look like they're probably trying to reseal the top or planning on resealing the top. Tires mostly holding air. 32 inch. Those tires have good tread on them. That's nice. LED lights. Seriously? Okay. This is funny. Haven't seen one of these in a long time. It apparently has a multi-tone air horn deal here with a little compressor wired in. Wonder if that works. Obviously the straight 6 and the 5-speed are what I wanted. And it definitely is a straight 6. Mobile 1 filter. Maybe someone actually cared about this at one point. That definitely doesn't turn. That one does. Checking the engine coolant. There's some murky stuff in the bottom. That's good. We're good there. Since I did know the alternator was an issue, went ahead and ordered one. and associated belts and hoses and things. The $19 rebuild I did before, still working perfect. So I know that works. I gotta get this thing going pretty fast. I don't want to be missing one part or something not fit and be stuck dead in the water. So I just went and got the whole unit. And hopefully that fits. Definitely encountering lots of rust. Every terminal's rusted. One of those field bolts snapped clean off. I'm glad I got a new alternator now. Out she goes. I didn't snap any other bolts off, but that one's a pretty important one. That is seized solid. Alternator's in. Let's throw a battery in this thing. That battery's dead. Try battery 2. This one came out of a Jeep that was running a few months ago, so it probably will work. That's good. It's spinning. That's nice. Check our vitals. There's a little fuel. Not warm yet. We've got good oil pressure, and we're charging. So we're in good shape here.
The gearing seems really tall. This is first gear. I think this has the 307 gears. With the 32-inch tires, it's just too fast for the woods, at least in high. But it runs really well, and that's the important thing.
Well, I smell gas, so start with the filler cap. We go under, and we see dripping. The question is, where is it coming from? I found a possibly OSHA-approved lift system. I think that'll all be fine. Now I can get under there and take a look at that gas leak. Alright, we have gas all over the place here. That's where the lines are. There is the fuel leak. And that looks like it's just on a line, so that might be easy to fix. Someone really tightened down this hose clamp. Whoever worked on this last knew this was leaking and didn't have a fix for it. Oh yeah, a lot more fuel coming out. Yeah, maybe we'll try the double clamp method. Let me go find another one. Hopefully a second hose clamp will slow this down enough to be okay. Now I can get under here. I can take a look at a few more things. There are an awful lot of vines grown into this thing. We got like 1/4-inch thick vines here. This has not moved in a long time. More vines. That's a new fuel filter. This used to be some kind of fuel filter skid plate. It looks like it might be an old shelving unit in place of the floor pan. That looks totally fine. Kind of. Hey, you can see right in the engine compartment there. It looks like this used to be more solid. A lot of stuff is rusted away under here. Hole in this side floor too. There's definitely some serious rust here. The rotors have a nice bit of rust to them. Bits of brake rusting off here. Exhaust hanger rusted off. Well, that used to be a body mount. A lot of rust repair on this frame rail. That used to be a skid plate. Some of it's still there. This used to attach the suspension track bar. There's some structural issues. We'll just fold this back and pretend it's still attached. Right here is my biggest concern. That transfer case angles down, then the drive shaft goes up, well, kind of level, and then the rear end is angled really far down. Kind of looks like we have a shim right there that twists the whole rear end upwards. Look at the way these tires hit too. This tire definitely does not actually fit in this wheel well. I'm wondering if at some point this had a huge lift kit cranking it way up. They rotated the pinion upward to take care of all the lift, put the stock springs back on with the shim in place, and that kind of ruined everything. That is a recipe for massive vibration. I've played this game before. I've seen vibration like that ruin new joints and transfer cases. I don't want to ruin that transfer case. Whoever worked on this last sure enjoyed his zip ties. We got several different colors, including a bright and cherry yellow. Got some more over there. You can spot those from a mile away. I'm going to take a look at this power steering reservoir. Since I knew that was going to be a problem, I went and bought one for a completely different vehicle. Those were really expensive, and I heard are very failure prone. This was like under 10 bucks. I think it's for a Nissan maybe, something along those lines. That might explain the leak. There appears to be a little bit of patchwork there. The reason I picked this Nissan one is, judging by photos, it looked like the two hose connections were in about the right spot and roughly the right size. Let's find out how close it is. The big hose is too loose, the little hose is too tight. They're both close enough that hose clamps did the trick. Fits in the spot pretty well. Of course it doesn't attach to anything. That's okay, because I found multicolored zip ties. And in honor of the previous owner, we're going to attach the tank with these. It does have a mount there, so we'll just wrap around that. Zip tie through the holes of the old mount. There. We now have a fluid reservoir. This is even the fancy kind of the markings that you can see from the outside, so we don't even need a dipstick. Moving up in the world here. Assuming we just average out the line since the whole thing's at an angle. That'll probably be fine. We're getting a little fountain of pink in there. See bubbles coming out. We'll go all the way one way, then all the way the other way. Apparently I forgot to shut this. Getting better at it. You just sort of lift, shove the tire over, and then, there we go. Probably should have done that before driving. Oh well. The other thing I need to do is try out low range. Does the transfer case work? It's moving. Kinda. There we go. There we are. That should be 4 low. These Jeeps were equipped with a vacuum disconnect front axle, which their main claim to fame is failure. They rarely work. The vacuum lines go, they rust, they seize, various things. When I switched to low range, the dashboard told me that's on 4-wheel drive. I don't know if it really is though.
Time for some scientific testing. I found a lump to drive on. And the front wheels do turn. The front axle works. The differentials are wide open. Brakes make an interesting sound, too.
I was getting tired of opening doors and closing doors. I forgot. This is a Jeep. We don't need most of this stuff. Now this is better.
I needed to do some thinking, because my original plan of driving this Jeep across the country didn't seem like a good idea anymore.
Happen to be in New England in the fall, this is the way to enjoy it. I'm going to head back and come up with the next part of the plan here. What I have here is another problemtunity, because this thing is not roadworthy. This thing might do a short drive here and there, but it is not, I'm not taking it across the country. There's a good possibility the axles might just fall out of it on a good bump, and I've driven through Indiana before. Now my plan is to haul this back. But when I'm hauling this back, I found a few other things I want to grab. We're going to haul a lot of stuff back. I rented a moving truck, making sure I did not read the terms and conditions, so that way I didn't know how many things I was about to do wrong. It even came with a nifty loading ramp that definitely would not support a Jeep. This truck is far too clean for me, so first thing I'm doing is adding a protective liner so that my stuff can go in it. Figure an old tarp tied to the rail should do well. Using a bit of scrap material to make a rack for the front end. Mounted to this brush guard, which looks pretty sturdy. Run a couple bolts through this. Woodworking. I think I gained a little roof clearance by squishing it down some. Perfect.
I was glad I got the power steering working. That came in handy with this weight on the nose.
We got a Jeep in a box. Unfortunately, these trucks don't have a whole lot of tie-down points, or any. But what I did is I sort of jammed it in here. I've got some tires just the right size, and I drove up on them and squished them a bit. I patted the spare tire, and that's touching the back here. I let the engine move it in reverse till it was jammed all the way back, and left the clutch out so it should stay right here. Let's check that gap to the hitch. We got clearance, many inches.
And soon we were ready to go. My daughter rode shotgun with me in the moving truck. My son and my wife followed behind in a chase vehicle. And everything was going great. We even had time for a go-kart break. And then, a mouse got into the cab. I'll let my daughter describe it because she saw it best.
So it breathes fire, nice horns, fangs. It was ginormous. I was terrified.
Looks like everything survived the trip fine. Didn't even bang the trailer hitch into the door. So we're all set here. I just have to extract everything somehow.
Now I needed to unload the Jeep, and this ramp just wouldn't do. I repurposed that hood rack to become ramps to get it part of the way. The mini truck kinda looks like a loading dock.
Phase one is working well. I got the front of the Jeep out of the truck. Now I've set up my car ramps on a set of dually tires I dragged home. The ramps are actually running into the rim here, so they shouldn't be able to slide out when I climb up on them. That didn't work. I've got tires stacked up underneath my car ramps. The theory here is that as I drive the front tires on, these ramps will level out and allow me to step down gracefully onto the ramp. And as I drive forward, the weight's going to transfer, and that's going to slowly drop this ramp gracefully onto that tire. Keep in mind the number of times I said the word gracefully. I have a feeling it's not the one I'm going to use afterwards. You know what? I am going to use the word gracefully again. That actually worked. I'm calling that one a win. After I pulled that tarp out, for everything I had in this truck, there was one small pile of dirt and a leaf. Worked out great. No damage at all. For all they know, I carried soft, fluffy mattresses and that was it. The Moon truck is returned, deposits are returned, they're happy, and that's all done and over with. And now I got a lot of stuff that I've been wanting to get for years, but was never really right for putting on an open trailer. Like these fenders, they're bulky and they're hard to tie down for an open trailer, but they're easy to stuff on a truck like that. This Austin Healey stuff, I've got a good chunk of car. I can do something with that. And this is so light and flimsy. This whole thing is thin aluminum. That would be really tricky to tie to an open trailer without actually damaging it with all the wind. And I got a lot of pieces of that. Also picked up an old sailboat motor. This gearbox has a super low ratio. It is moving. It's 215 to 1. Some spare alternators. This track machine project's going to be really interesting. I'm looking forward to that one. And that's another one where the pieces would have been hard to tie down. Here's some spare bus parts that were up there. Some bits fell off this bike. If I had an open trailer, I would have lost that and that fender. Got some extra Jeep parts here, a few spare drive shafts, another Willys transfer case, but the gear is looking pretty good and it rotates. I don't feel any slop in this at all. I think it's just been sitting. It wasn't cheap to rent a truck like that, but some of the stuff really wouldn't have worked well otherwise. And I got a lot of stuff to play with. The old 232 is coming out of this Jeep. I have to take a moment to admire this exhaust before I take it off. We have the head pipe coming off the manifold, very normal. Then we switch to this corrugated flex pipe, which seems totally fine. Then that is bent at a hard 90-degree angle, crushing a lot of it in. Absolutely oil soaked right here on this section. Some baling wire, not holding it up, just hanging out there. Then another hard 90 with the diameter reduced quite a bit. And then it goes to the actual exhaust pipe itself. There's an undersized coupler here. You can see the carbon residue where all the exhaust was coming out before the muffler. And then the actual muffler. Some normal rust holes and another rust hole where a lot of the exhaust went through. More exhaust leaks. And continues all the way on to that fancy tip. And that tip's very unique. It's a one-of-a-kind profile. It's got a lot of contours to it and an interesting shape. Probably caused by driving over something. I'm going to use a broomstick to give me a little support here. That looks good. Now I can get rid of this red negative cable. For some reason it always bothered me just a little bit when the red was negative and the black one was positive. I wonder if the heater core is going to be clogged. Pulling an engine out in an old vehicle like this is really pretty simple. The most complicated thing was the alternator wiring. There are 4 connections because it's an external regulator. 1 wire for ignition, 1 wire for the coolant temperature sensor, and 1 wire for the starter, which now that I look at it, doesn't have insulation on it. It's probably good that I'm doing something about this. That's all the wiring I needed to disconnect. I had one complication because I added that vacuum booster. So I had 1 hose to disconnect here, the hose for the fuel pump, line for the oil pressure going to the gauge, and radiator stuff. But that's basically it. There really isn't that much to these engines. But now we're going to level up a little bit and take out a fuel injected engine. That's going to be a little more complicated. The 4-liter in this YJ is basically the same fundamental AMC6 as that 232 I pulled out of the Wagoneer. It just has about 30 years of evolution on it. A lot of parts like the head and the crank and things like that are actually interchangeable if you wanted to. People put these 4-liter heads with the fuel injected on the older AMC motors. And sometimes the older AMC cranks from the 258, they'll put in the 4-liter to get a stroker. So it's virtually the same engine, just with fuel injection. And obviously the fuel injection makes it a little more complicated, but also makes it drive nicely. And I noticed this particular engine is already starting to remove itself. The air cleaner fell off sometime along the way.
I'm going to help it out now and remove it the rest of the way. Get rid of these fancy zip ties. Get rid of the air horns. Apparently this guy wanted to be heard. You have to try these out and see what they sound like.
The dashboard button never worked for these horns. We're going to try hooking it straight to a battery and see what happens. That's a good compressor. Let's try that again. I've got a secure mount on the compressor now. Let's see what happens. Alright, that's loud. I noticed these other two weren't attached, so let's see what they do. They work too. I have no idea what we're going to use this for, but I have working air horns. Looks like that power steering reservoir I threw in there is working fine. But I don't need power steering right now, so I'm going to remove the entire pump off the engine and leave it all connected right here. The good thing about modern vehicles, that even though they have giant piles of wires, they usually have nice connectors that you can just disconnect. Now here's the high power wire from the alternator, and it's got a connector with a clip on both sides. And you have to lift up this one and the one on the other side at the same time. Cases like that, you just make up a little tool. You can pry each one up separately and then it'll hold both up. So I'm going to pry up one side. You're in antifreeze, aren't you? I can lift up each tab individually and slide my wire underneath it, and that'll hold it up while I go to the other side. Now that both tabs are held apart, a little bit of wiggling because this has been together for a long time. But now we can use the regular number of hands to slide this connector apart. I'm labeling as I go. Some things I know what it does, like the oxygen sensor, so I can just label that. Some things, I have no idea what the plug does, so I just label the location. Some little hoses, I'll just put a number on and a corresponding number where they plug in. It's only a matter of making sure everything goes back where it came from. Where I can, I take things in one unit and leave them plugged in, like this map sensor. I'm gonna pop this out of here. I'm not sure why they used to mount these pressure sensors on the firewall. My guess is they try to isolate them from the engine vibration, and the old sensors would vibrate and cause bad readings. Newer ones are actually mounted right to the engine, so I think they just got better sensors. But anyway, that's all connected, so I don't even need to worry about labeling the wires. Sometimes it gets tedious and I want to rush, but then I'll take a step back and take a break, work on something else for a while. You always got to keep in mind this is supposed to be fun. And if you're not having fun, change the way you're doing it, because you're doing it wrong. Like this feels like the starter bolt's real rusty and is going to break off on me. I'm not going to force it. I'm going to soak it in oil and go do something else. It'll be here when I get back. I'm having a tough time getting this boot around the shift lever. Underneath here it feels like a couple of flat spots where I could take a wrench and turn it, but I can't get to them. And then I remembered these transfer case drop brackets. That would move the transmission down also. I'm going to get rid of that down there and we'll take another crack up here. Rain and rust. It's enough extra height to get the wrench on it. But it sure is not turning. I'm just going to leave this shift lever on for now and hope I can take it out with it attached, because I can't remove it. This is future me jumping in here. At the time I did that, I pictured that transmission to be like this similar Dodge transmission where the shift lever unscrews and you end up with a little stub sticking out. It wasn't until much later in this video I learned how they actually work. I'm getting close to taking this engine out. There's something I want to do before I do that. I want to see where this front axle is relative to the oil pan. I want to mark that location, because when I go and install this into the next vehicle, I'm going to have to position this engine somewhere. If I could position this engine in the same spot relative to the front axle, it means my front drive shaft is the right length, and that's done. I'll even label it axle. Maybe. Close enough. Looks like the transmission mount only had one nut holding it on anyway. Looks solidly rusted, so that's not going to be easy. Let's pop that off of there. Oh, guess that was easier than I expected. Just sheared the bolt clean off. That was fast. I thought this had a lift kit on it. I'm absolutely convinced now. Take a look at this shock absorber. Notice it's almost completely compressed. I took this one off and extended it. That's a bit of a gap. These shocks were not meant for that ride height. That axle probably was down here somewhere at one point. That's an impressive shock mount. That bump stop wasn't sturdy. Definite suspension issues. Granted, that's not really necessary, but you wouldn't want it flopping around as you drive. These vines had grown all through this vehicle. This sat for a long time in one spot. Oh hey, more rust holes. The body's not even attached there at all. I'm taking the fuel tank out because it has a high pressure pump for injection. I'm stuck on one bolt on this gas tank skid plate. This is fuel pump and sender and all the good fuel tank stuff that we need. There we go. I think I can take this whole filler deck out with the tank. A little bit of wiggling. Yep, it's going. I'm going to drain this transfer case because I have to drop it down in order to get those levers through the floor. The slip yoke is what holds the oil in the transfer case. With that out, as soon as I drop this down, all the fluid's coming out the end anyway. I might as well do it ahead of time and catch it. Easier than cleaning up the whole floor. Let's see what we got here. Now it should be ATF, so I'm expecting red. Oh yeah, that looks pretty clean. I almost feel bad draining that. I hate draining good fluid. I mean, granted it's 30 years old, but still looks nice. I think I have everything disconnected, so we're gonna do a little test lift here and see if it moves. I undid every bolt in these motor mounts. So I want to remove them entirely. Maybe. I want to. There's my hammer. I'm just going to leave the mounts attached to that engine. I'm sure that'll be fine. Now I want to move this whole thing forward a little bit. I moved it a couple inches. Now I'm going to go through and look for anything I forgot. Those are all free. Clear there. Vent tube clear. Wiring harness is coming with us here, it looks like. Back of the engine looks clear. Don't see anything on this side. I'm going to have to drop this down. I might have to take out the shift tower, but it looks like the transfer case lever is on top of that. So I'm going to try to just drop this down till the shift lever clears. I have the transmission and transfer case supported by a jack, so I can just lower that. The whole thing should drop down. So right now, the whole engine, transmission, transfer case is supported by the chain and that jack. It's not actually attached to the Jeep. So that's going to stay in position, and I can roll the Jeep backwards away from it. At least that's the theory. Got a ratchet strapped to my lift, so I can just move it back one notch at a time. See how that looks. That jack is looking awfully unstable, so I put a jack stand underneath the tail shaft here. I'm going to reset that jack and get it more vertical. It's a little more stable. Get the jack stand out of here. Well, now I've added a lot of fresh fuel to this tank in order to dilute the old varnishy stuff. I need to remove the tank, so now I gotta drain it. Luckily, there's a drain plug in these old tanks. Got my universal square drive wrench. It's even turning. You can probably hear my big vent fan going. This is gonna be stinky. I don't want to be breathing this. Or build up the fumes in the garage and blow up. That'd be bad too. Either way. Oh. I was expecting a lot more coming out. I'm guessing the bottom of the tank's full of sludge too. There we go. Yep, getting out of the way. Brown gas coming through. When taking out this tank, you need to disconnect the fuel filler neck. I took a look at it. From the filler neck, it drops really far down and then goes back up. That right there might be the reason for the slow filling. Wonder how much fuel is trapped in this little section here. Oh, yep, we got some more. Drop this down. Oh, more splashing out over there. We'll ignore that. There we go. This frame has multiple mounts for the engine on it, and I don't like any of them. If I take these off for now, I'll give myself some more room, and I can always bolt them back in if I do want them, but I don't think I do.
Well, I had both engines out. I wanted to check the bell housings. They really are different.
I used up every bit of travel I have on that hoist, and I'm just about in there. I think a little push. Yep, there we go. Now we just gracefully drop that down and slide it right in. And I'm sure everything will go fine. I gotta do something about this shift lever clearance issue. The transfer case should be easy because I can shift that forward. The only problem is it doesn't shift easily. I'm gonna put an adjustable wrench on the transfer case lever itself. Yeah, there we go. That's a lot easier. I figured I'd do a little research. You're supposed to be able to do a twist and turn on this lever, just like the old cast iron 4-speeds. Gotta get this rubber boot out of the way. We need to take that ring right there, push it down, and turn it. Here's a learn from my mistakes moment. Probably be a lot easier to do this on the ground than while the transmission's suspended over the vehicle. It's probably worth thinking ahead on this one. Gonna get a little more traction by taking a couple pieces of sandpaper, put them under my thumbs while I do the pushing and twisting. And that made it come right out. The transfer case lever is actually hitting the firewall, and the oil pan's hitting this radiator support. So this is a tight fit. When you're doing something like this, if anything looks weird or funny or takes a turn you don't expect, figure out why. Because if you don't, it could cause you more damage in the long run. We'll just go a little at a time and get in there eventually. We're just going to adjust a little bit more. There's a tiny bit of clearance now, and another tiny bit. Let's see if we can keep going. I felt it stop moving. Check. We're touching that transmission mount. But luckily, I think we can do that one by hand. There we go. Back to free again. I'm going to use a ratchet strap to hold this transfer case up on this end. This is going to be temporary while I figure out how I actually want to do the mounts. But at least I'll hold it in place and I can wiggle it around a little. And more importantly, I can get the Jeep up on this lift and actually see what I'm doing. There we go. That's supporting weight now. Here's this hefty piece of steel tubing in the last engine. I think it'll work again. I'm just going to put it across the leaf springs. And it looks like that will be right about where the bell housing is. I got a block of wood across the front axle to that bar I had, so I'm supporting that oil pan fairly decently. And all the weight's off this hoist. Well, that's it. This 64 Wagoneer
now has a 94 4-liter fuel-injected engine in it. That's also it for this video, because even though the engine's physically in there, there's a lot to go. I'm gonna have to figure out the positioning first, and then the wiring, and then hooking everything up, and that's gonna take a little while. Because of editing, it looks like I did all this real quick. I find that working on it a little bit at a time, and then doing something else and coming back to it, keeps it kind of fun. If I do too much at once, sometimes I just don't want to work on it again, because a lot of the wiring and the rusted bolts get a little annoying. By working on it a little bit at a time and leaving before I'm frustrated, it keeps it fun and keeps me motivated. Hope you guys are having fun too, and we'll see you next time. I also got to take care of doing some real work, because the credit card bill with that moving truck on it's coming in soon. That one's going to be a doozy. I have to pay some bills here. In case you're interested, I'll show you a little bit more about this little Lego moving truck. We came up with this because I didn't want anyone from the company I actually rented it from telling me what I did wrong with their truck and having a little issue with that. Basic Lego chassis, the old style steering, a few U-joints, actual dual wheels in the back and a working differential. The ramp does slide out just like the regular moving truck, but the regular one it stayed and didn't fall out. This button up here turns on the power. Got an old train style remote control that actually turns it on and drives it. It doesn't work very well because the pickup sensor for the remote is buried under the hood here. You can just about see it inside there. The signal doesn't get through well at all. A couple times this almost went off the table when I couldn't shut it down. Luckily my daughter was catching stuff there. Now this isn't very fast. That's top speed. In some of the video we sped it up to make it look a little more realistic and not take as long. Nope, now it won't shut off. Stop. Come back here. Definite reception issues. On the steering, there's a gear drive motor going to a worm gear, and that goes to a slip clutch. And that turns the steering shaft. When you turn it, this just leaves the motor on. You control speed only. It just keeps turning until it stops. The little slip clutch is slipping. It's trying to turn, but then it releases. We can stop it. If you want to turn it the other way. On the inside, we didn't have enough Legos to actually make this right. We used every single white brick in various shapes and sizes. There's even a window shutter in there to make up a little extra space. Now we can see the drive motor. And there's the battery pack, which has the little on-off button. That's what this presses to turn it on and off. So it was a fun little weekend project.